Very much, Jill, and thank you everyone for attending the webinar today. I hope you find the information useful. We're going to get into, we thought with the start of 2022, it would be a good idea to just revisit some of the more common cybersecurity attacks and how to recognize them. The landscape is really always changing. The threats we deal with now are probably a little different than what you dealt with in the past, and they'll continue to evolve. So I feel like this is a topic that really should be revisited all the time. So let's get started. So just to introduce things, the people who have the most influence of whether we're successful in our security goals are not very technical. So what do I mean by that? People need to be aware of the threat landscape. When we're giving control to individuals with our sensitive data and our systems, and people are going to go in and start, really playing a stake in the success of our organization, we're really putting a lot of trust in them. And if they decide to do the wrong thing, intentionally or unintentionally, it's the organization that's going to be caught with the consequences. So things like this, talking about what the threat landscape is, how to fight back, how to be aware of things, how to report, how to communicate is very critically important. It'll help you make good decisions about personal technology and data. So, every year, we are all making decisions about our technology all the time. What kind of device we want to use, what applications are useful to us, where we store our data, who we share our information with, and the channels in which we share our data. If we don't really understand what the threat landscape is, what people want to attack us with, I don't feel like we really know how to make good decisions. So it's really important we understand that. It's also important to know how to react and respond to an attack when it happens. So we don't want that deer in the headlights look. I mean, the reality is that if you're using a computer or connecting to the internet or doing something with data, something is going to approach your desk that is going to be a threat, whether it's just a plain Jane phishing email or a ransomware attack or some kind of malware or adware or a scam or some of the other things I get into. People just need to know in the moment what they need to do, because those are some really critical moments. Most attacks target the individual first and the technology second. I talk about this a lot, which is that a lot of the times it's the people that are the weak link in the chain when it comes to security. Think about, for example, the way a lot of ransomware hits. A lot of times ransomware targets a particular vulnerability, but is implemented by you downloading a package from an email or from a bad link or something like that. This is still targeting the individual first because it's getting the individual to take an action before the consequence can occur. It's also important because we want to understand how changes in technology can impact security posture. So for pretty much everybody on the call, I'm sure over time you've shifted from different data centers that you use. Maybe you went from on-premise to the cloud. Maybe you were a Mac shop and now you're a PC shop, or you stored your email in this place, now it's in that place. What we have to understand is that every time we make some kind of shift, whether our business grows or changes, or we decide to relocate or make a technology change for the better, it's going to have an impact on our security posture. Our risks are going to change. So if we understand, really where the threats come from and where those threats are going to hit, we can understand how our new environment needs to change, how it needs to adapt to minimize our risk. I hope that makes sense. So for our agenda today, I wanted to revisit the threat landscape, and you can update your security posture. So first, we'll talk a little bit about shifting trends from 2021 into the future. So, just sort of the things we saw last year that really impact us right now. And this stuff is always fluid, right? So, this time last year, January, I guess this was around the time we had FireEye and I'm forgetting offhand the other attack that happened. And that really kind of set up everything in 2021 in terms of how we responded, how we adjusted our approach to security with our clients. We're going to talk about ransomware's growth. It's pretty obvious that ransomware has become a big issue, both from just a plain threat perspective, but also in terms of how we adjust to dealing with it, how it impacts things like cyber insurance, our compliance perspective, all that stuff. So we really do want to talk about ransomware. Account privacy and identity threats. So, so far, I was talking about ransomware, which is really an attack primarily on the device and the data. But what about the account itself? The email that you're hosting on Office 365, maybe your personal Facebook account or your LinkedIn account. What about identity threats, where somebody tries to either impersonate you to commit some kind of other crime, like a phish on your staff, or perhaps something even more personal, such as taking your information, impersonating you, and trying to take out a credit card in your name, something like that. These things still happen. Fraud, misrepresentation, obviously a big thing on the internet. If you have a cell phone, I'm sure you get lots of calls telling you about your car's extended warranty, or your student loan bills that have been refinanced or something, a lot of baloney that you get. That stuff is way out there. But I mean, the reason this stuff exists and the reason that people fall for it and the reason it continues is because it's a profitable thing for the criminals. Another thing I wanted to go over, just sort of like a personal security checklist, things to go over, whether you're an individual or a business. Maybe it's not exhaustive. There are definitely things that are going to be a little bit more sophisticated, but this is a baseline. If you're not doing this stuff in 2022, you really need to re-examine your security soon. Otherwise, the threats I'm going to talk about might make you a little bit exposed. And as always, we're going to get into Q&A. So anything I don't talk about here, things you want to hear more about, just feel free, put something in the chat, either now or later, whenever, and I will try to address it as best I can or offline. So anyway, let's talk about trends real quick. So the first thing I found, this was a really interesting stat, is in 2020, 74% of organizations were target of payment scams and 76% experienced email fraud. I mean, we're talking almost universal numbers. I've been telling people, and we're going to get into a little bit later, is if you're not using sophisticated passwords and multi-factor authentication, chances are your account will be compromised. I mean, you can see if you're being targeted and the criminal has enough resources, they'll get what they want. They're just looking for the weak link in the chain. Another big trend, and again, especially since the start of COVID, and I think it's continuing, maybe it's getting in some ways even more tricky since we have this very hybrid environment, is this blurred line between business and personal devices and accounts. So I've talked in the past about the concept of quote unquote shadow IT, which is the idea of people using things that are not a part of the organization's official technology stack. It's really important that no matter whether people are using their home devices to work, or perhaps their office thing or something they check out of their office, what websites and databases and CRMs and cloud resources are available, that we have a total accounting of what people are using, especially as it pertains to the organization's data. I think it's getting harder for people because a lot more people are sort of going off and doing their own thing without the oversight that is necessary. Ransomware is bigger than ever, and it's a black market industry. I mean, people think about ransomware payments. I mean, it really is not about your data at all. It really is not about anything but getting money. And as long as there are systems that are poorly protected, that don't have the defenses to protect themselves and are basically just waiting to be infected with ransomware, this will continue. The insurance companies, if you have cyber insurance and you're covered, et cetera, it could be a nice big payout for a criminal if you're infected with ransomware. They know that the money is behind it in Bitcoin or something like that. It really is its own sort of cottage industry. There's more attacks targeting end user devices with things like smishing and vishing, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later, and something called SIM jacking. So SIM jacking is the idea of someone trying to pretend to be your cell phone, right? So taking the SIM card out, replicating it, and it's trying to make it so that they're getting your calls instead of you are getting your calls. It's essentially a trick on the carrier. So AT&T or Verizon or whoever forwards those calls the wrong way. More cloud provider attacks. So you've probably seen, I know maybe a month or two ago, we saw some interruptions to Teams. We saw interruptions on Amazon Web Services. I remember that was a big one for a day. And that affects other things too. You have to consider the fact that when you have companies like Google and Microsoft and Amazon who hold a big sector of the public cloud, where people are, not just using those services directly, going to Amazon and purchasing a web server, going to Microsoft and getting a Azure server or something. There are other companies that you probably do business with that use these services on the back end. So for example, I do phishing testing and security awareness training using a platform, and that platform was hosted on Amazon. And when we had the Amazon issues, I had some issues doing phishing tests that day. We're going to see more of that probably, because when you're looking at the cloud provider, it's just a lot of assets leveraged in a specific area, and the juice is worth the squeeze. And when you look at other events happening, especially geopolitical events, there are things like concerns about targeting infrastructure. One of the goals of the pipeline attack that was last year was to create infrastructure problems. It's about causing trouble. It's why foreign governments oftentimes will protect hacking groups and ransomware groups, because it helps advance their political goals or their chaotic goals. So we need to keep an eye on that. If you're leveraging something in the cloud, expect an interruption and plan for it. It's not to say that the provider will be gone forever or that you'll have a serious issue, but you need to plan around it. So let's pivot and let's just talk about ransomware. So 2021 was a landmark year for ransomware. Hopefully 2022 isn't, but I can't promise that will be the case. I think it's a real big deal that cryptocurrency is out there, and it makes it easy to get ransomed. So if you are trying to get paid, you can't really pay ransomware with a credit card or with a bank transfer. With wires and things like that. I mean, you can do these things, but cryptocurrency, especially if it's routed the right way, can be a little bit less traceable. And as long as the money is out there, people are going to go after it. Now, in the Colonial pipeline attack, I believe the feds actually got back some of the cryptocurrency that was paid towards it. I'm not 100% sure. I think there will probably be a little bit more improvement in the future on tracking these things to make it a little less easy for crypto to be used to pay off ransomware, but I think that kind of helps. It sort of fuels the fire. There's low-hanging fruit in systems that are improperly managed or have known vulnerabilities. So every so often, you might even see them from me when we send out alerts to our clients about major issues, but other companies, security companies, Microsoft, all of them will publish 0 days and other vulnerabilities that say, hey, we've discovered that this version of some server has some kind of vulnerability. And if you're using a managed services provider like DP Solutions, chances are we're taking that information, addressing it, patching the system, or doing the workaround or whatever it is to reduce the risk. However, not everybody has an IT services provider, and some IT services providers don't get it done, or they don't or their IT department's overwhelmed or something like that, can't stay on top of these things. Those systems are low-hanging fruit. All you have to do is get that little catch. It's somebody clicking the phishing email or the vulnerability that wasn't patched, and all of a sudden you have a system-wide outage. As long as that stuff exists, they're going to be targets. It can't be few and far between. It's not totally dissimilar from things like COVID. If COVID has no hosts to sit in, it doesn't spread as well. But ransomware right now has a lot of hosts it can sit in. Internet of Things and other unmanaged network devices becoming entry points. So this is definitely a trending one, which is the so-called Internet of Things. Think about all of these network devices that are non-traditional. Things like, I always use the refrigerator as an example. The refrigerator that talks to the internet, it talks to your wireless access point, which then talks to the internet, and that's how it gets updates, or that's how it gets the weather or something like that. And the truth is that if these devices aren't secured and then someone gets into the OS of that IoT device or somehow gets a hook into a network through an IoT device, all of a sudden they're a little bit closer to everything else on the network. And I think as people adopt a lot of these non-traditional devices, they totally forget about supporting them, just like they forget about supporting their home Wi-Fi and making sure that it's up to date and not aged. There's really no difference between, I guess there is a difference, but there are a lot of similarities, I should say, between a old Wi-Fi, home Wi-Fi access point that hasn't been maintained, that hasn't had its credentials changed or patched or whatever, and an IoT device that has a similar sort of lax attitude. So that's going to be a problem into the future, I think. Phishing continues to be prevalent as a frequent delivery mechanism. So the thing about phishing, especially with email, is that it's kind of hard to stop the attack from coming in, right? You know, if email is an open system, if I want to send someone an email, the only thing stopping me is a spam filter. And if all I have to do is get around the spam filter, I can probably figure that out. That's just going to continue. We have to be prepared to see these emails and see them coming in, because there's nothing we can really do to 100% stop them from being delivered. That's just where we're at. So how do we fight back against ransomware? You can see that's me, by the way. That's an artistic rendering of me as a boxer. I have one very tiny fist and one big fist. The first thing I'd recommend is next generation endpoint protection. So we've been making some changes with our clients over the past year, moving away from traditional antivirus products, which are fine. You know, don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to trash these products or anything like that. But as we move into the future, there are products that are a little bit more specific to stopping ransomware, either from infection or also the consequences of it for getting it to spread. So you can either treat the illness, the virus, or you can treat the symptom. The next generation endpoint protection kind of tries to do both. So I really have been recommending that to people. Phishing and security awareness training. So I think this is also critical. If your staff isn't aware of what phishing is, your staff doesn't know how to identify a phishing email, who to report it to, whether to forward it or not forward it, all this other stuff, you really need to get on top of it. On my phishing programs, I do quarterly phishing tests for our clients, where I just send a random email every quarter, usually without them knowing, depending on what they want. And I try to get people to click. And hopefully by teaching them, by sort of exercising that muscle, they're a little less likely to click on those emails. Same thing for general security awareness. People need to understand, like we're doing today, about what the landscape is, what's out there, how to respond to certain things, what kind of data is sensitive to us as an organization, what our policies are, so on and so forth. If you're not giving that education to your people, you're probably going to have a problem. Patch management and supportable operating systems. So this isn't a new thing. This is something that's been out there for a long time. You need to be on an operating system or technology in general that is supported by the vendor. So right now that means you're using, for example, a Windows 10 or better machine. It means that you're using a router, a firewall, something like that, that's still getting security updates from the manufacturer. You know, after about 4 or 5 years with any product, there's a decent enough chance that the vendor is no longer supporting it with updates. And so what happens is that when a 0-day vulnerability is identified, something is found that's causing problems on the internet, a new vulnerability, they're not being addressed by the vendor because the vendor no longer supports the product, meaning you're now that low-hanging fruit for someone to attack. Very critical that you have the supportable things so that you can do the patch management tasks, so you can make sure all these things are patched. And when the ransomware tries to infect you, it's hopefully blocked. As I mentioned, keeping on top of 0 days and other newly discovered security issues. So I want to bring that up real quick because patches and updates address known vulnerabilities, right? Think about every time there's a patch that's issued, it means basically that they discovered something new. The vulnerability always existed. It's just that now they know about it and now they're addressing it. So I always tell people not to get too comfortable with their security posture. You can do everything right, and then some new thing is discovered and it requires you to act really quick or respond to a threat that you didn't necessarily think was going to come in. You still have to stay on top of these things and sort of keep a general awareness. I hope that makes sense. Account privacy and identity theft. So it's been estimated that 1/3 of email and social media accounts have been compromised. That's an enormous number. I actually feel like that's a little low. I would almost say it's got to be more, but low. I'm not really sure. But that's probably not going to surprise you. I mean, I think if you're probably on this call, it's not that you probably have more than one email address, maybe a business and a personal one. You probably have multiple social media accounts, other sorts of personal accounts. And I guess chances are, at some point, you probably discovered that that account was compromised. It's just sort of a law of numbers, unfortunately. There's a rise in cyber attack victims due to personal breaches, as well as unsecured databases connected to the internet from third parties. So what do I mean by that? So first, there's two types of data breaches. One is when we breach ourselves, right? I had my information either in on my own cloud account or my personal device or whatever. That vault, if you will, was compromised, and now someone's taken all of my data. That's obviously happening a lot more. But then there's another side of this, which is that you decided to work with a company, and maybe you know, Valentine's Day is coming up. You decided to do an order with the company, and you put in all your payment information, your address, maybe you put some personal information for a note or something like that, whatever. And then the vendor that you were dealing with got compromised, and now your information is out there because of that third party. Maybe that's an overly simple example, but the point is that even if we're doing the right things, sometimes our information can be breached by people who we share it with. And I'm not trying to point fingers necessarily. Sometimes it's not even the third party's fault, but there's just this rise of information being spread out there on the web. The most common root cause for data breach is stolen user credentials. So that's according to IBM. Stolen user credentials can be gathered from a variety of places. It can just be broken. Someone could use a brute force thing and break it. Someone could have bought your credentials from an unencrypted database from the dark web or something like that. Someone could have stolen your credentials because they phished you. You accidentally volunteered them and didn't realize it by logging into their fake website, and now they're in your account. But regardless, the truth is that these credentials are broken all the time. So how do we fight back? That was me, just to be clear, that's me punching the bad guy. I'm not the one getting punched. Multi-factor authentication is a must. So my rule is that if you really care what's behind the account, like if you're really worried about what might happen to you, if some bad guy got in and accessed that account, and this is whether it's an email account, a work account, a Facebook account, a LinkedIn account, bank account, I don't care. You need to explore whether you can use multi-factor authentication, where you can get either a text message or you use like Authy or Google Authenticate or some app to pull a code when you log in or maybe authenticate for the first time. The reality is that a password over time is probably going to get cracked, whether it's your fault or not. And we need that extra layer so that if that password is cracked, we maybe get the text on our phone to realize that someone's trying to log into our account and we can react to it, or just block them to start. They never get access, and we can then go in and change our passwords or whatever. Multi-factor authentication dramatically reduces the likelihood that an account's going to be compromised. Not entirely. Accounts can be compromised anyway, but you know, if you're using MFA, you're really going to be quite reduced. Be your own advocate for your data privacy. So pay attention to who gets your data whenever possible. I think that a lot of times we give information out to others, and we think about the benefits of it. You know, the product we're going to buy, or the partnership we're making, or the house we're about to purchase, or whatever it is. And we don't think about the downside of the information we're giving out, especially when it's trivial, right? You know, oh, there's a contest I can enter, and all I have to do is give them all my personal information. Now I'm entered in their contest that I'm not going to win anyway. You have to be your own advocate and not just share with everybody. The more places that have your information, the more likely that information is going to be breached. And I'm not saying don't share your information. Look, I sign up for all sorts of things. But we have to be mindful of it. I hope that makes sense. Never share your credentials with anybody. If you forget, just reset it. You know, it kills me to this day where people have these shared accounts where multiple people log into the same account, because there's no way to secure that, period. We never know where a breach is going to come from or who caused the breach. It's a problem. And cyber criminals sometimes, especially with some of this phishing, smishing scams, etc., will literally ask you for your password, and sometimes people will just volunteer it as part of an attack. If you don't know the password on your account, make sure you reset it. The worst thing you could do is have a bad password and share it with a billion people. Be careful if a link takes you to a site requiring a username and password. So one of the common phishing attacks is, hey, check out this thing, and then you click on it and it says log into your Google account or log into your Microsoft account to view this document or something like that. That's kind of a trick, right? So it's making you think to access a file that it's within your system, and maybe there are situations where that happens. But you need to be really careful about the links and the URLs you go to when you click that link, because maybe it's not directing you to Microsoft or Google. Maybe it's directing you to some fake page where they're just harvesting credentials. Be very, very careful at any time that you're on a website and all of a sudden you're about to enter your username and password. Make sure that it is where you think it is. Education, as always, people need to be aware of this stuff. Avoid data sprawl. Organize your personal info in a way that's easy to manage and secure. So it's important that when we have our information, I say personal, it could be business information, whatever, but it's really important that we have centralized repositories, logical organization, and not have it sprawled out everywhere. Well, our client's data sits here, and our personal data sits here, and our design data sits here, and they all sit in 50 different places. Now I have to secure 50 data centers, 50 locations, different cloud providers, instead of maybe a few. Now, granted, there's sometimes you're going to build out infrastructures that have complication. Don't get me wrong, but we want to build simplicity in with whenever possible, because the more simple and the more direct a thing is, the easier it's going to be to secure and manage. And it'll probably cost less too. Fraud and misrepresentation. So identity fraud, digital account fraud, and payment fraud are all on the rise, according to Bank of America. And they would know, because they're the ones who have to protect this stuff. Especially with a credit card, if there are unauthorized charges, a lot of times the companies have to eat them. And so they're tracking this stuff very carefully. And I think you're going to see even more action on this stuff. There's actually automation being used to break into accounts with bots that act like humans and beat the CAPTCHA. Now, if you don't know what CAPTCHA is, that's when you log in and they give you the pictures and you say, click all the pictures with motorcycles in them or something. And now the bots, it used to be the CAPTCHA was being used so that bots wouldn't do that. Well, now the bots are learning how to do CAPTCHA. So this is kind of inevitable, right? The good guys create a security tool, the bad guys find a way around the security tool, so the good guys create a new security tool. We just have to be aware that this stuff happens, unfortunately. Cryptocurrency platforms are actually becoming targets. So, if I can just target someone's account on their Bitcoin wallet or something like that, or I can go after an entire platform or brokerage that deals in crypto. That's a big, again, I believe there's a really big attack on one of the wallets last year, as a matter of fact. Phishing, smishing, vishing, all of the ishings are up right now. It's easy to do, it's cheap, there's nothing really stopping it. And again, I brought up points like a lot of the people who organize this and actually profit from it are not even located in America, and they don't really have governments that stop it. Fighting back. First, hover over your links. So in Outlook, for example, you can just hover over the link and it'll tell you exactly where it's going to go. When I do phishing tests for people and they click on the link, they never hover over the link, because if they hover over the link, they would see that it doesn't go to Amazon or Facebook or Federal Express or whoever I'm using as a phishing example. It goes to some baloney web URL that I created. Hover over the link and you can learn a lot. Sadly, expect most calls to be fake. I mean, I haven't done a formal survey on this, but looking at my cell phone, it feels like I get more illegitimate calls than legitimate calls. And honestly, I don't even pick up the phone if I don't recognize the number. They can leave a voicemail. Some things sound pretty real. Sometimes they use real people's voices, or or whatever. The best thing to do is just don't answer the call. People who really need to reach you about your student loans or anything important will find a way to reach you legitimately, including the mail or coming to your house or all sorts of things. So, you know, I'm pretty much skeptical of anything that's dialed into me over the phone. Think before you take a significant action like paying someone a lot of money or authorizing a major account change. So, you know, a lot of the phishing scams are, we need to buy these gift cards for the staff, or I'm away and I need you to make this account change while I'm away because it needs to be done right away. You know, creating that urgency. If you're about to do something that's going to have serious consequences, there needs to be transparency on it. So even if you think you're doing the right thing, you've sort of dotted your I's and crossed your T's when it comes to making that wire transfer or changing the admin on an account, it's really important that you take the time to show some people that you're making this significant change, it's being documented, that the entire process is transparent. If you don't do that, you're liable to actually commit the act that's causing the consequences, and then nobody even knows for a few days. It's better to address these things right up front. Be prepared to do things like change passwords or clean up other issues if you suspect an account compromise. You know, I usually just tell people, when in doubt, change it. You know, if something is happening, if you feel like you're being attacked or someone may have gotten into your account, you know, just change the password first and worry about it later. The worst thing that happened is you change the password. That's not the end of the world. I usually take the aggressive approach, which is to say, let's do all the things possible to make sure that we're protected, and then worry that we did too much later. It's sort of hard to do too much. Don't ignore your accounts and check in on things and close inactive accounts. So, you know, if you have an account that you haven't logged into in ages, and it maybe is an old investment account or maybe an old email account that you set up a long time ago and you don't really use it anymore, I mean, just close the account, just get rid of it. The more we have, whether it's infrastructure, computers, software, accounts, etc., the more we have to manage. So I usually tell people, be very mindful of what you need. It's like do a Marie Kondo on your, that's her name, right? On the accounts. Less is more. Maybe that shouldn't be in a 2022 webinar. 2022 personal security checklist. So before we wrap up, I did want to get into all the things that I think individuals and businesses should be doing to protect themselves in 2022. This is not exhaustive. There's probably other things I would recommend to individuals. If you want to have a chat about your situation, when we get to the end, I'll have my contact information. We can have, you know, open-ended chat. It's totally fine. First is obviously active patching and updating on devices to deal with new threats. I get a lot of notifications from our security partners, from vendors, etc., notifying me when there are issues, and I read all of them, and usually about 1 out of 10 of them or so we have to take some action on. We have to say, you know, go into ConnectWise Automate, run a patch, do whatever, you know, take quick action on. But a lot of times when we hear about these alerts, it's actually kind of a yawn, and the reason is that if you're actively patching these things, and a company like one of our partners, Arctic Wolf, let's say they see that an exploit is being done in the wild, and they report like, well, you know, this Windows 7 vulnerability is being exploited to attack all these people, but I got nobody on Windows 7. Well, then I just say, well, good, we're good, not worrying about it, move on. That only happens if you're staying on top of this stuff. When you stay on top of this stuff, it's way easier to deal with it. As I mentioned earlier, multi-factor authentication on any login where something you care about is behind it. Get familiar with multi-factor, learn to love it. I know people get frustrated, they get annoyed. Oh, I have to check my phone to log in. Oh, I just did this or whatever. You know, these minor aggravations of having to check your phone or take a text or something are tiny compared to the aggravations of major account fraud, etc. I mean, I think if you know, I remember years and years ago where I had some bank account fraud that I had to deal with, and I had to sign an affidavit to declare that I didn't take the money out or something like that. I mean, that's awful. I'd hate to deal with that as opposed to a text message. Strong endpoint protection software. So every device that you're using, particularly desktop and laptop computers, needs to have strong endpoint detection software or protection, something that fights back against all of these pieces of malware out there. And that needs to be updated. It needs to be on active subscription. Even the bare minimum for like home users like Windows Defender, as long as that stays up to date, at least you're doing something. I always err on the side of caution. You know, for our clients on managed services, we've been putting them on SentinelOne, which is a product I'm really happy with. I just think it's necessary moving forward. A basic understanding of today's threats, you know, doing things like this, you know, participating in trainings, etc. Everybody needs to take a little bit of time. What I say is we're not going to create a staff of security engineers at your business. We want to create people who are actively engaged, who care about what they do, who have some basic recognition, who know if something's happening that they can be a part of the solution, stuff like that. It's unrealistic to expect them to know everything or do everything perfectly. But people who care about this stuff have way better outcomes than people who don't. So I just think that's super important. Personal inventory of your finances, personal information, accounts, and other areas where you have digital risk. You know, do a personal audit. Write it all down on a piece of paper. These are the places that I have stuff. This is where my finances are. This is where I have maybe risks. If this got broken, this is where I would be hurt. And then you can go back and say, okay, now that I know where my risks are, what do I need to secure around it? What other tools can I use? Similarly, an inventory of all devices, including non-traditional devices that connect to the internet. This could go for your business or your home, right? You know, making sure that you know everything that connects to your sensitive data assets, everything in your house that you have to maintain, so on and so forth. Modern Wi-Fi and solutions at home with homes with non-open connections. I mean, I think you can pretty much take a laptop to just about any sort of densely populated area, maybe an apartment building or a office building or whatever, and you can open it up and you can look and you still see open Wi-Fi connections. Sometimes these are people's homes, sometimes these are businesses, whatever, but it still exists. And the truth is that it's basically a free highway for anybody to jump on and maybe steal packets or commit some kind of crime or attack or something like that. So Wi-Fi really needs to be modern. We should be using devices that have the latest security standards and protocols for wireless. A reliable backup for particularly important data. So, you know, backups are tricky because what works for one person may not work for the other. But what we do need to do is after we take that inventory of our finances and information and stuff, we need to have an understanding of what our recovery time is, what our recovery point is, all that stuff, and actually have a technical solution that addresses our data backup needs. The good news is, of course, is that backup technology is not, you know, bleeding edge necessarily. You know, you can there are new backup technologies, but the reality is that if you have data you want to protect, you're not going to have to move heaven and earth to find a good backup solution. So, but you have to have one. So just wrapping up real quick, the most important thing you can do to protect yourself is to keep yourself up to speed with the latest trends. It's really hard to stop everything, you know, just like personal health or illness or anything like that. You can't stop everything from happening. The goal of all of this is risk minimization, not risk elimination. We can't eliminate risk. We can minimize it, and we can also make it so that if we're compromised, that we're able to respond in a way that minimizes the damage to us. It's the same reason we wear a seatbelt. So we're driving around on the road, you know, wearing a seatbelt means I'm much less likely to die in a car accident. Doesn't mean I won't die, doesn't mean something bad won't happen, but if I wasn't wearing that seatbelt, there's a really good chance I'd fly out the windshield if I got into an accident. So think of it a lot like that. I love to use those analogies because you can really apply a lot of those rules. Anyway, at this point, we'll take some questions. While you guys are putting questions in, I do want to talk real quick about what we're going to talk about in February, which is how to create your disaster recovery action plan. So that'll be a month-ish from today, I guess the 23rd in February. You can go to the website events to register. And yeah, I mean, really important. And when I talk about disaster recovery action plans, I'm going beyond, people think a lot about backups and restoring systems. It's more than that. A disaster could be, for example, a pandemic, or it could be a weather event, or it could be a power issue or fire. It could be a staff problem. It could be anything. I mean, the reality is that there are a number of things that qualify for disasters. Fortunately, technology, planning, et cetera, can help manage that. So anyway, I hope you attend. And with that, Jill, do we have any questions?
Yep, we had a few questions come in. So our first question is, should I invest in cryptocurrency to pay ransoms?
I guess there's two questions. Should I invest in cryptocurrency, semicolon, to pay ransoms? Cryptocurrency is highly volatile. Anyway, I mean, I wrote this webinar earlier in the month, and I mentioned cryptocurrency, and I think in the markets, Bitcoin in particular, I think has been all over the place. It's hard to invest in something like that in terms of the purpose of paying a ransom where you don't know what it's worth at any given time. I don't know about investing in it. My advice to people, if they're worried about paying the ransom, is to make sure they have a good cyber insurance policy. You don't want to have to worry about having crypto aside to pay someone. And more to the point, the cyber insurance companies and their agents, people who work for them, or the people they contract with. If you really get to the point where you have to pay the ransom, the insurance companies will usually handle this on your behalf. They will deal with the criminal and they will try to handle it on their own. And all you really have to do is pay the policy and follow the rules of the policy and adopt the right security standards. That's the way I would approach it. If you're like trying to bank cryptocurrency because you're worried that, well, we need to have something, we had to have money aside to pay for ransom, you really need to have an insurance policy. So I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that's great. Okay, next question is, do I still need antivirus software?
Do you still need antivirus software? Well, you need some kind of anti-malware application. What you need is going to depend on the device, what's on it, and the level of sophistication. So, I mentioned SentinelOne. I really like SentinelOne. It's a great product. But you don't need SentinelOne on every computer in the universe. It wouldn't make sense. A lot of machines, for example, I talk about the ransomware threat. But if I had a machine, a Windows machine, and there was nothing really sensitive on it, let's say it was like a kiosk machine, and there's nothing really stored on it, and it got ransomware, I could just wipe that machine and start over from scratch, and who cares about the ransomware, right? And in that situation, a traditional antivirus product is probably fine. However, if I'm in an office environment, and let's say I'm working in finance or healthcare or anything where there's sensitivity, and pretty much in any business there's going to be something with sensitivity. I don't think I can rely on the free AVG software or some free antivirus software to protect all of my interests. In those cases, I look for the more sophisticated endpoint protection solutions. This is a highly personal question, especially when it comes to the business side. So I would recommend, if you work with us, to have a chat with your CSA about what we offer. If you're not working with us, please reach out and we'll give you our insights on that as well, and what you maybe want to do in the future. I hope that helps.
Okay, great. All right, next question. How do you feel about password management tools like LastPass?
I love them. They're great. I mean, so LastPass, there's a number of them. Assuming they're a known vendor that has their act together, and the good ones do, they're great tools. It's better to use them to generate complex passwords, store those complex passwords, than doing the thing that I've seen people do before, which is someone writes on a legal pad and puts it in a desk somewhere. These are all the passwords to the system, or something like that. And then somebody who opens up a drawer has access to everything, or just using the same password over and over and over again because you like that password. Password managers are great for that. Now, there's a caveat to this, which is we have to manage the password manager, which means the password manager can't have weak authentication. You can't have a crappy password getting into a password management system. We need to have multi-factor authentication and security and alerting and all this other stuff. But in general, especially if you're going to be managing tons and tons of accounts, I've got 4 email accounts and these bank accounts and this investment account and da 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 da. I think a password manager is a great fit in those personal situations. Any other questions, Jill?
So far we have one more question, and that's, is it safe to use public Wi-Fi like at a restaurant or a hotel?
The answer is maybe. So I generally don't do this. I mean, to be fair, I haven't found much of a need to do this with recent events. Understand that when you're working on a wireless network that you don't manage, right? And the example I use is a Starbucks, right? You walk into Starbucks, you pull your laptop out, you connect to their open Wi-Fi, and you start working. You don't know what the other customers in the restaurant are doing. You don't know whether Starbucks is adequately maintaining the device or monitoring it at all. You don't know if that device has been there for 10 years without gathering dust in the back and it's using old protocols or something like that. You don't know if someone has set up a man in the middle thing where something is, maybe there's something called pineapples, a rogue access point that pretends to be Starbucks that's gathering your information or whatever. So I just brought up all this negative stuff, and you're like, well, why did you say maybe? The reason is that if you're just going on that network to check the weather for like 2 seconds, that's probably okay to do on your phone or something like that. I generally don't do it. I think it's kind of sketchy. The other thing is that if you're using the right kind of device, so I'm connected to the Starbucks network, but I've got the right endpoint detection on this device. All the data going out of this device is through a VPN channel that's encrypted, so they can't even read it if they were on the network anyway. Obviously, that minimizes the risk as well. I think it's really beneficial to think about your personal situation, what you're trying to achieve by doing this work at a public Wi-Fi access point, like at the Starbucks or the airport, the hotel, whatever. And then you can kind of make a more educated decision as to whether that behavior is cyber healthy, if you will. I hope that kind of makes sense.
Yep, I think that answers the question. Okay, I don't see any more questions coming in.
All right, great. Well, thanks everybody for attending. I hope you found this informative. My information, my email is right here. You can send me an email if you'd like. Have any questions? You can also follow us on LinkedIn and all our web stuff. We like to publish lots of educational stuff, not just this webinar, but blog posts, videos, etc. It's really important that we share this message. We want less attacks, whether it's for our clients and us or anybody in the community. So yeah, please check all that stuff out, and we look forward to seeing you next month. Thank you so much. Have a great day.